Well, here is the big story from the aviation space, and I would have to say that this is a long-expected line. Singapore Airlines and Tata Sons have decided to merge Air India and Vistara to create a new giant in the aviation industry. Singapore Airlines will invest more than 2,000 crore rupees and pick up a 25% stake in the combined entity. So how will the combined entity stack up against the likes of Indigo and others? Madiha Mujawar, who broke that story, joins us now with more. Madiha.
Well, this has been the most awaited announcement in the Indian aviation space, and the deal is finally done. Singapore Airlines and Tata Sons have agreed to merge Air India and Vistara, and as part of the transaction, Singapore Airlines will invest $250 million in Air India. It will get 25.1% stake in an enlarged Air India group. The merger is expected to complete by March 2024, subject to regulatory approvals. SIA has also agreed to infuse additional cash if required, which comes to up to $615 million, payable only after the merger is completed. So what does the combined Air India now look like as things stand? Let's look at the market share. In terms of market share, Indigo will continue to be the dominant player as things stand, going by the current numbers. In October, the combined market share of the four Tata-owned brands stood at nearly 26%. Indigo, meanwhile, enjoyed a 57.7% market share. So even together, the market share will be half of Indigo's. Next, let's look at the size of the fleets. As things stand, Air India Express, Air Asia India and Vistara together have 200 aircraft. Indigo, meanwhile, has 245 aircraft in the air. Indigo has also been carrying more passengers on its fleet, on its aircraft. From January to September this year, Air India Express, Air Asia India and Vistara together carried 3.4 crore passengers, while Indigo carried 5.3 crore passengers. That's a difference of nearly 2 crores passengers. Let's move to domestic passenger load factor. This metric tells us how much of an airline's passenger carrying capacity is being utilized. Indigo has a PLF of 82.1% individually. Air India, Air Asia and Vistara enjoy a higher PLF than Indigo, which averages out to 84.1%. Lastly, I checked the on-time performance of these airlines in the domestic market. On this parameter, Tata Group's airlines have taken the top 3 spots in October. This also tells us that this is the first time that Air India has topped the on-time performance ranking in many years with an OTP of 90.8%. Indigo has slipped to number 4 with 87.5%, behind Vistara and Air Asia India's 89.1%. Experts tell me that given how the operational parameters could be, Indigo will definitely be in for some stiff competition from the synergies a combination of the 4 Tata brands could generate. And air passengers are definitely in for some interesting times.
Well, Madiha, many thanks for joining us. And to take this discussion forward, joining us now, Jitendra Bhargav, the former ED of Air India. Also with us, aviation expert Mark Martin. Mr. Bhargav and Mark, appreciate you joining us. Mr. Bhargav, let me start by asking you, as I said, this is a long-expected line. Once we saw the Tatas pick up Air India, it was only a matter of time that we would have seen the Tatas take this merger route forward. Singapore Airlines was at the start not necessarily in favor, but they have come around, and finally we've seen this deal being inked between Tata Sons and Singapore Airlines. The impact of this combined entity, our colleague Madiha was just taking us through numbers, but makes economic sense, makes business sense, makes strategic sense for the Tatas and for Singapore Airlines.
See, it is the market realities that's made Singapore Airlines come around and agree for merging Vistara with Air India. It would have been far, far better had this been done at the disinvestment stage when Tatas had bid all by themselves. Now, it makes enormous sense for them to do it, and what I'm very impressed with is the professionalism that has gone around, because had this merger not been done with the kind of haste that's being done, very welcome and timely one, that if Air India had gone about expanding fleet, expanding its network, recruiting people, and then the merger would have taken place, it wouldn't have made much sense of it. The time is of the essence here. And I cannot but go back to 2005, when Air India and Indian Airlines both placed orders for different kind of aircraft without taking into consideration the synergy benefit that could flow, and then a few months later, the merger came along. So look at the contrast between a professional management and a government-run airline. And this is what will help Air India in terms of cost, in terms of market muscle, in terms of growth program, tremendously. As I've been often saying, it would have made little sense if Vistara and Air India both were to fly to international destinations. So they were to merge together, and the fact it's happened in 10 months' time after Tata's regained control of Air India. Hats off to the Tatas for the speed with which they are working and the objectives with which the disinvestment took place, that Air India not only needed to survive, but needed to be revived. So in Tata's hands, safe hands, and what Mr. Natarajan Chandrasekhar had said on day one, that we are going to make Air India a world-class airline. So you can look at Air India moving in that direction. What a welcome thing and what a tribute to J.R.D. Tata, the founder of Air India.
Yes, in fact, just picking up on what you said, and Mark Martin, let me address that issue with you. Singapore Airlines has come around, is back on the table and has decided to ink the deal. And I think it's instructive to look at what Singapore Airlines has said in its disclosure to the Singapore Stock Exchange. It acknowledges the fact that Vistara has been loss-making, and if it needs to scale up in order to achieve its goal of network efficiency to reach profitability, it faces challenges in scaling up amidst severe competition in the Indian aviation market, and hence Singapore Airlines deciding to go forward with this merger and also addressing another crucial aspect, which is capital infusion, much needed capital infusion for Air India, Mark.
Hi, Shereen. Thanks for having me today. The interesting part is the writing was always on the wall. Back in 2000 and 2001, Tata SIA came together to make a bid for Air India, and this has been something which has been there for the last at least 22 years. So they're both coming together to acquire and come together and run Air India is not something which is new. It's been on the game plan. It has been on the playbook. With Vistara, I think it's great to see Singapore Airlines accept and admit that Vistara per se has been an utter disaster from day one. The airline has not worked. They've had a gross identity crisis. They've had a product crisis. They really didn't know how to market it. They've had a disastrous chain of leadership and CEO and management. And I don't think there's any great shakes in merging it. I think this was pretty much an aggressively desperate move, and this had to be done. Now, with respect to where do we go forward, it's all good to see that Air India create a formidable airline network, and I think this falls in a game plan, Shereen, because Air India will focus on running a dedicated international operation while the Vistara arm, and we don't know whether the Vistara arm will be called Vistara or Air India, that would be a domestic airline, and so there will be a very good synergistic relationship between the two. My bigger concern here, Shereen, is who controls the driving seat, who runs it, who controls the board. With 25% stake at $250 million, I think that's a ridiculously low fee for Air India. It's highly undervalued. But on the flip side is, what are we going to see in terms of managing and running the airline on a day-to-day basis? Because I think we all know running Vistara has been a major challenge for SIA, and now does that madness come over to Air India? Is that going to be a challenge? Air India already has acquired, it has taken over a CEO who's been from the Singapore Airlines cadre. So it's not all buoyant and it's all not hunky-dory. It's certainly rough, and I think they're going to have to iron out a whole loads of issues over the next couple of months until March 2023.
The road ahead is never as smooth sailing as one imagines it to be. There will be several challenges, but this is a significant first step in the revival plan, as Mr. Bhargav was also pointing out. Mr. Bhargav, just addressing that issue that Mark raised, in terms of holding 25% is what Singapore Airlines will hold in the combined entity, so its clear majority rests with the Tatas. They've already brought in a new CEO from the Singapore Airlines cadre, was looking after Scoot. Campbell Wilson is currently in the driver's seat of Air India. If we were to map out the next steps now, of course the regulatory approval, CCI, is going to be a big one. By the way, do you expect any issues on that front, any roadblocks on that front, Mr. Bhargav, as well as what the next steps you believe will have to be from here on?
Simply not. I don't think it will face any regulatory hurdles for the simple reason that government had disinvested Air India with the clear intent of ensuring that Air India regains its past glory. That's the first part of it. The second part that you made mention of is the infusion of funds by Singapore Airlines. Let's not overlook the fact that Air India needs a large quantum of funding, expansion. The aircraft have been on ground for want of money having been paid to the vendors who supply spare parts, etc. So this infusion of funds will help Tatas in accelerating the pace of Air India's revival. And as regarding Mark Martin's point on Vistara, I wouldn't agree with him. Vistara is a good airline. They've got professionalism, which will flow into Air India after the merger. The loss cannot be a factor. India's market environment is such that the best of airlines, Kingfisher, Jet Airways, have failed to make profit. For the simple reason we are a price-sensitive market. The moment fares go up, the number of passengers patronizing an airline goes down. Now, there are factors. As I've often said, the government got to reduce the taxes on aviation. Industry has no longer to be treated as an elitist industry or meant only for the rich and the famous, but it's a catalyst for economic growth. The promoters of the airlines have to be very realistic. Don't try and keep selling seats below the cost of producing a seat. It's disastrous. You lose out in the long run, like we have seen the demise of so many airlines. And then, of course, is my request to the traveling public. Do not expect fares to be low at all times. To the parliamentarians, don't accuse airlines of fleecing when fares go up, because if they were fleecing, they wouldn't have been reporting losses quarter after quarter. And we must ensure that airline business becomes a profitable business. One quote from J.R.D. Tata in 1953, before the industry was nationalized. He said, the need is to have small number of airlines, but with deep financial pockets, and not a large number of airlines, and many of whom are financially weak. So let's hope this consolidation is another step in that direction and realization of the dream or the kind of legacy or the kind of wishes that J.R.D. Tata had for the Indian aviation industry.
Oh, absolutely. You do require deep pockets to be able to ride out the Indian aviation market. We've got many cautionary tales here, not just of broken business models, but also of a fairly tough operating environment. But of course, we will have to wait to see how this plays out. And it's good to have disagreement. I'm glad that you disagree with Mark on Vistara's performance. But Mark, I want to come back and talk about the flight path from here on. So one, of course, is the Air India Vistara merger, but there's also the other aspect of the Air India Express, the low-cost arms of the Tata Group. That simplification and that consolidation also underway at this point in time. So the Tatas do have their hands full.
Yeah, Shereen, I think from the start, AirAsia and Vistara, the joint venture airlines, have been a sheer disaster. And its facts and actuality has proven everybody over the last 5 to 7 years. So a lot of these steps, this isn't any great step up for both airlines. They both have had financial issues. And I'm going to correct Jitendra. And I don't blame Jitendra because he is an old Air India romantic, and I don't justifiably so. But Jet Airways was an airline which was in profits, and what turned out later was everybody's guess. But from a strategic and a broader perspective, I think the bigger question here is how is it going to be funded? And let's be honest, the Tatas have been part of even worse turnarounds. I mean, Tata Steel was turned around from being a loss-making company to being a global company today. So similarly, Tata Motors. So I don't think the Tatas are desperate for Singaporean money or anything. I think this is more of a strategic step which is going to go a long way. My bigger concern is, as you rightly pointed out, CCI. To what extent is Singapore Airlines going to be controlling Air India? How strong is the control going to be? How aggressive is Air India going to be used as a special purpose vehicle to attack Gulf carriers? Is Air India going to be used as a secret weapon to go after European and Southeast Asian airlines? What's the bigger game plan? plan. That's the point. This isn't about going to, what JRD Tata said 50 years ago, and God bless his soul. I think this is more relevant to where does Singapore Airlines feature in the longer air transport strategy of India. India is a sovereign state. India is a vibrant democracy, and with that, a robust air transport service network should function, must function. In a perfect world, I hope it works in unison between Singapore Airlines and Air India, but I think from what we know already, it has been a rough, rocky road with running Vistara. They've had CEOs leave every year. They've had financial issues. They've had AOG issues. Tata Administrative Services has been involved in Tata Vistara joint venture throughout. So it has been rough. And I think going forward, a lot of questions need to be answered. And Air India has no stake in the government, neither does the government has any stake in Air India. It is a private company. It's governed by private rules, and it's governed by CCI and the law. And so the law will have to step in if there is a CCI violation or any violation for that matter, Shereen.
Yeah. Now, of course, if there is any question of violation to start with, Mark, and I would imagine that there's been a battery of legal eagles working on this deal to try and look at any possible eventuality or run-in with either the competition regulator or any other regulator. Mr. Bhargav, I'll give you exactly 10 seconds. I know you wanted to jump in, and I'll give you the last word to close the discussion.
One is to be positive and look at the positives that are flowing out of the disinvestment process and Tata's ownership. The other is to take view, because no one has ever said that it's going to be an easy task for Tata's to revive and ensure that Air India thrives in the market and gathers it. But look at the sense of pride that will come to the Indians. India originating traffic will be harnessed by Indian carrier. So far, the Southeast Asian carriers and the Gulf carriers have been taking away Indian market. The task is formidable, I admit. Tatas are capable of doing it. I would say yes, they will. It's only a question of a couple of years. It's been 10 months since they regained control of Air India. Give them time, and one can look at the kind of decisions that have been taken thus far. Flights have been announced, expansion of flights to Europe and United States of America, two major markets. The Southeast Asian market, Gulf markets are being taken care of by the other Indian carriers. But there is no other carrier barring Air India which is flying to Europe, United States of America, Australia, Japan, etc. So that's the market, and Tata's own Air India is on right track. Mark Martin, I'll see you 6 months later and then question and say, look what we said on Shereen's program on 29th of November.
We would love to have you, Mark and Mr. Bhargav, we'd love to have you back here in 6 months' time to debate and discuss which one of you stands vindicated. But for this evening, appreciate you joining us here on the News Center to take us through what you make of the big news that's coming from the Indian aviation market, and that is the story of Tata Sons and Singapore Airlines coming together to merge Vistara with Air India by 2024. That's it then on this edition of News Center. We'll take a break. More coming up. Don't go anywhere.